Hello, it's Cisvolk. Time to enjoy card making with me. In this video I will be working with the new summer fun collection. The stamps and stencils are designed by Carlacreaties for CraftEmotions. Carla designed this one 2 years ago and now she added 2 new summer fun sets with awesome freak shakes on them. In case you didn't know, this is a freak shake. There are all lovely ice creams, sweets, macarons and fruits. In this video I will give you inspiration and learn new tips and tricks for card making. Also I show you different kinds of inks and papers and teach you how to make a nice image even better. Also I will use the summer fun stencils, the fruits, the ice cream and the drip stencil. On my Pinterest page, Cisvolk, you can find some older cards with the Summer Fun Collection number 1 and the drip stencil. For the first card we will start working with the Stress Oxide inks. And I will show you that I work on different kinds of paper. You can do both ink blending with oxide inks on color card paper as well as watercolor card paper. The difference between them is that this color card paper is smooth and useful for alcohol markers like the Tombow ABT Pro or just pencils. The watercolor card, the aquarelle paper, is somewhat more structured and suitable to handle water, so you can also use it with a water brush or just a brush. Both paper are suitable for ink blending with Distress Oxide inks. The difference is that you cannot add water or make a distressed look if you want on color card paper, while on the watercolor card paper you can add water over and over again. Also the blending will look different on these two papers. I will make a card with both of these papers and try to show you the difference. To start with, I will use the watercolor card paper. I hope you can see how it looks close up. This paper is very white for an aquarelle paper and also very smooth, different to other aquarelle papers you might know. And this smooth color card paper is very smooth and white. It looks similar to DCP paper. It makes a huge difference when you color on this paper or if you color on a random piece of white paper or a normal printer paper. With the watercolor card, I will make a slimline card. To cut the panel, I will use this deckled edge slimline die. It comes with all Christmas ornaments. To make a rectangle on top of the card, I will use this square deckled edge nesting die set. It is square, but I can adjust it to cut a rectangle. I will show you later in the video. First let's cut a piece of watercolor card at 11 centimeters and run that through the die cutting machine. On this paper I will do some ink blending and use the drip stencil. I slide the top of the stencil behind the paper so I can choose where to place the drip. See, if you place this edge underneath, you are not bothered by it. If you choose, you can also of course cut it off. With a scrap of masking tape I will mask parts off that may not be blended. I use all scraps for this purpose and use masking tape more than once if possible. Using a domed blending tool, let's add a chocolate drip to the paper. I will add lots of vintage photo Distress Oxide ink. You also see black soot in the corner of the screen, but I do not use it. We want a big layer of ink. It is dark chocolate. You could also apply the ink with a blending brush or sponge tool. I use dome blending foams because they can add a thick layer of ink and I specifically save them for only oxide inks, while I use brushes for dye inks. With stencils you have to be careful not to damage the foams. That is why I sometimes dab instead of rotate with the tool. Distress Oxide ink stays wet a long time. And what I want to do is make it glossy with not much effort and mess. And since I'm not that good at adding layers of paste of any kind, I prefer adding embossing powder. When you add clear embossing powder, you basically add a layer of gloss. See, the powder sticks to the wet ink. It works best when you add a thick layer of ink. I like to use a piece of tracing paper to catch the remaining powder and throw it back into the jar. Such a jar of powder lasts a very long time and I love using it. It is a quick and gorgeous way to lift up your cards to the next level. You only need a heating tool though. When you are heat setting the powder for watercolor card paper, make sure your heating tool is heated up very well before you start melting the powder. You don't want the paper to warp, and you also don't want the embossing powder to sink into the paper. You want to see the embossing powder on top of the paper. Because this paper is porous and has less smooth surface, the powder can sink into the paper easily. Best is to heat emboss this paper from the back side. Also, don't heat it too long on the same spot. Try to heat set the embossing powder as quick as possible. Parts that still need heat are matte and parts that are finished are glossy. I am not the type for a glaze or structure paste. I always struggle with structure paste and also hate having to clean the stencils as well. I don't struggle with embossing powder, so this is my preference. Also, my glossy paste dried up, so I ran out, and embossing powder never dries up. It will last forever. If you struggle with embossing powders and prefer pastes, you can of course use the drip stencil after the blending as well. So this is a colored ink with clear embossing powder on top. Clear powder is my number one color for embossing. Now we have a fresh shiny chocolate. Yummy! Next we come in with the color Festive Berries. And I have to try first how much I would like to add. Let's start light. We can always add more. I want light at the top and have it heavier at the bottom. I'm adding stamps and coloring on top later, so I don't bother in making a super smooth perfect blend. This will have to dry first, before we go on working on the panel. Also, we don't want to have oxide ink on our lovely chocolate drip, so I buff a little bit off with a tissue, so it will be shiny again. I want to have this panel dry completely, because I want to stamp and heat emboss on top with white embossing powder. If the red ink would still be wet, the white powder would stick everywhere instead of only on the stamps. You could of course heat emboss this again, but I don't want to mess up on the drip and waiting for it to dry on air is better. The paper will stay flat. For a variation, I made another similar panel, this time blended somewhat darker at the top. I placed the drip stencil on the paper again, somewhat shifted. Now I take some distress glaze. It is by Ranger. Nowadays the package looks a bit different, but it is the same product. With this you can protect the paper for water and make it kind of waterproof. Adding water next won't have any effect on the parts that you treated anymore. I use a blending tool to apply it with onto the paper. Before adding the distress glaze, I waited for the ink to dry and I also buff it a bit off with a tissue. It prevents the sponge from picking up some ink. I apply the distress glaze now on the inked part, in the same way you would add ink. It feels a bit like petroleum jelly. The Dutch call that vaseline. I buff off bits that are too much now, because I am used to do that. However, I might have better way to doing it. You will see why in a moment. It's hard to see the parts where I applied the distress glaze at the moment. This part will stay the same. But you will see it better when applying ink or water on the parts that are close to it. And that is what I will do now. I will go into details of this in another video, maybe one day, but for now I will go quick. We squish 2 shades of pink oxide ink onto a plastic surface. For now I use a laminated folder that I use for storing my stamps. I spray it wet, swirl around with a brush to get rid of the square forms and to mix a little of the colors together. And then I will dab that piece of plastic onto the paper. It is not a problem if the ink comes on the place where there is no ink needed, because we resisted that part with the distress glaze. You can already see what happens. The drops of water stay floating on top of the distress glaze. I made it too dark and all the same color, so now you don't see a thing, and that's not what we want. Let's dab some ink off and spray some water on top. Immediately we now see what happens. The resisted parts stay the same, and the rest of the ink on the watercolor paper reacts with the ink and drips down on the paper. Normally I would just wait for it to dry, but now I am in a hurry to finish this and use the heat tool. I guess adding the heat is not a good idea as it reacts to the glaze. Just wiping it off would have been a better idea. I also might have added a thicker layer distress glaze. Let's add another layer of distress glaze and add more water and ink. This is fun to play with. It is awesome to see the water sits on top. Actually, the drops I now have on the drip feel like happy accidents. While the slimline panels are outside waiting for them to dry, we will work on the third card. Now we will be using the color card paper, the one you can use to color with markers and pencils, and also blend ink on. So this is sturdy and very smooth paper. It is 250 grams. For a card panel we need a piece of 10.5 by 14.8 centimeters. On this card panel we will ink blend. I chose 3 darker shades and 3 lighter shades of distress oxide. I have Mermaid Lagoon, Salvage Patina, Mustard Seed, Twisted Citron, Festive Berries and Worn Lipstick. I will mix and match all colors on the card panel. These colors match well together. I made a short video where I made a card with only the macaron stamps and these same colors. You might have seen that short video already somewhere on any of my accounts, on YouTube, Facebook or Instagram. There is no rhyme or reason where I put colors. Just put dots of colors on the paper. I use a tissue to pull off the foams and replace them with another color, so my fingers stay clean, I hope. I should probably started with the lighter colors. Now my foams get dirty. Don't forget to clean the foams to not get mud when mixing colors. And go back to an earlier color to blend the edges where 2 colors meet. I don't put very much effort in this and just make a quick mixture of colors. This bottom layer cannot be too thick, because we want to add a stencil layer on top. Do you see that the blending is different on this paper? On the one hand it's softer, on the other hand you get stripes more easily, but that is also because I'm using blending foams. I'm happy with the blend now. See, the blending is smooth. Well, the blending on the watercolor card paper is also smooth, but there is a difference. And I must say, I did not do my very best on both of these ink blendings. We will add stamping and stenciling on top, and a lot of it will also be covered by an image. So having it blended perfectly is not important. Now we will add the popsicle stencil on top of this colored paper. And I will start and then blend with slightly the same colors on top. See what happens? I blend a bit darker and add the festive berries on the darker red parts. Next I switch to the pink parts and take worn lipstick to add to parts that are orange at the moment, because of the blend with the yellow. Do you also see that I use a clear block to prevent my fingers getting dirty? I could also use tape, but that is a bit slippery on the stencil. You see, I add darker shades on the same colors that are underneath of all openings in the stencils. Let's check how it looks at the moment. Oh, that's nice. Some parts still need more contrast in color. It is so nice with oxide inks that you can layer easily on top of each other. On top, where there's too much pink, let's add some salvage patina. Now we will wait for this panel to dry. The colors will even look better when dry. They will get a bit lighter. Now we go back to the drip panel with the watercolor card paper. We want to check if the ink has completely dried. The drip has been heat embossed with transparent embossing powder, the clear one by Ranger. And this is the white embossing powder. Later I will use this on this panel, but for now I will sprinkle a bit on top and see if the powder sticks. As long as the powder does not stick, it is safe to stamp on top of it and heat emboss. Let's use the smaller images from the other stamp sets to the card base. I did a short video on the lemons, also with great tips for you. It is on my socials. For the heat embossing, I will use the clear Versamark ink. Because the stamp pad is very soft, we don't want to put a lot of pressure in inking the stamp. Therefore, it is best to tap the ink pad on top of the stamp instead of tapping the stamp on the ink pad. If you would press too hard, there will be ink in between the grooves of the stamp and make thick, uneven stamped lines. Try to prevent that when using soft ink pads. So just tap lightly on the stamps. You cannot see the stamp impression yet, but that will change after we applied the white embossing powder. I now randomly but alternating, I stamp these 3 stamps on the card base. This Versamark ink will stay wet long enough to be able to stamp the whole panel. The cherries are well used. I used them to stamp with archival ink. Archival ink leaves a residue on the stamp that is very hard to remove. It does not affect the stamping with other inks or colors, luckily. Remember to also stamp on the edges and stamp half images. Now the panel is completely stamped, we can add white embossing powder and also heat emboss that from the back side. The remaining powder goes back into the jar. We can now color the stamps. I prefer to use a Tombow water brush for it. This has a sturdy, fine tip and is ideal to me for coloring stamps on watercolor cardstock. We can color with just water to make the ink that is already on the paper some lighter in shade. The oxide ink reacts with water and we can use that in our advantage. You don't see the effect immediately, but you will see when the paper dries up. We can also add a new layer of color. I add a bit of color on a clear block to use as a palette. You can also use your glass plate for it, or maybe just a saucer or a plastic sheet. I will use the same colors as I already used on the card. So again, the worn lipstick, the festive berries and the vintage photo. The brown macarons will look like chocolate ones. I randomly color browns and pinks. In between, I clean my water brush and dip it dry to a tissue. There is no water in my water brush. It also works this way. I try to color and have different shades next to each other, so no 2 browns or darker reds together. When it is dry, I can add another layer to add more color and shading if I like to. This panel is now dry. On this panel I just want to stamp with black VersaFine ink. Let us take the donut, the orange and the glasses. With VersaFine ink you can make very crisp stamp impressions. The ink stays wet for a longer period of time. so make sure not to touch it. Again, alternate between the stamps. Never stamp two of the same images next to each other. Never stamp two images in the same position. And never have the images sticking out over the edge as much everywhere. You see that I also used the tiny corners of the glasses or the orange to fill in the gaps at the corners. I did not stamp the middle of the panel on purpose. This spot will be covered later on. So this panel I will let dry for now. And we go on stamping and coloring the freak shakes. This freak shake I stamped with VersaFine ink and heat embossed it with transparent embossing powder. As I already said, the VersaFine ink stays wet longer and the powder will stick to it easily. Memento ink is water-based ink. This ink dries up quickly and it soaks into the paper. You cannot use it for heat embossing. But you can color on top of it with alcohol markers, and that is a plus. Would I just stamp with VersaFine ink and color with alcohol markers on top of that, it would totally smudge. Even if the ink was dry, it would also ruin my markers. For Memento ink, coloring on top is not a problem at all. Because I added a protective embossing layer on top of the VersaFine ink, I can color with my alcohol markers. Now I will stamp with the Memento ink and also with the same freak shake stamp on the same color card paper, so we can see the difference. Actually, you would prefer to stamp Memento ink with a stamping tool, because then you can stamp on the same spot more often if you miss a spot. Now I ink a lot to make sure there is enough ink everywhere. Always ink the stamp pad on the stamp and not the other way around. It is possible, look, the stamp on the pad, but it is not convenient. You get ink on your fingers quickly and you tend to push way too hard. Now when stamping with water-based inks, like Memento ink, you will have to give the ink some time to soak into the paper. You will have to leave the stamp somewhat longer onto the paper. For VersaFine ink this is not necessarily. You stamp it and the ink will sit on top of the paper immediately. But dye inks, like Memento, need some time to transfer from the clear stamp to the paper. Leave it on the paper somewhat longer. You will see that your stamped impression is nicer and darker than when you stamp and lift it off immediately. Look, here he is! Now you can clearly see the difference between the two inks. The Memento is a bit lighter and the VersaFine darker and sharper. Therefore it is my favorite. But I have some tricks to pimp the Memento one up a bit, so it will be hard to choose. And you don't need embossing powder or a heat tool for that. So that is interesting for you if you don't have all that fancy craft supplies. Because of the clear embossing powder, I now can color them both with my Tombow ABT Pro alcohol markers. I want to show a quick way of coloring. For that, first we need to make a mask. I use CraftEmotions stamped masking tape to stamp on a part of the image that does not need coloring. I already used pieces for ink blending on an envelope, but I'm frugal and use it a few times. It will still work and it will still stick. For making masks, always use inks that dry fast. In my case, I use the Memento ink. You want to cut out a mask and don't get ink on your fingers or get the ink that is on the mask on the stamp or on blending tools that you use. I only need the eyes, so I can stamp in the corner and skip the rest of the image. I glue the masks of the eyes on the eyes. We want them to stay white. We could also mask more parts, but I have another solution for that. This we will color with Distress Oxide inks. There is still some worn lipstick ink on my tool. We only need a little bit on this part. The brown chocolate I want to color a bit darker. The cookie I also want brown, but I do not want to smudge over the donuts with this big blending tool, so we skip that. When using small blending brushes you can be more precise. We will let this dry and now go to the other paper. This is the color card paper where I stamped on with the dye Memento ink. I will be using Tombow ABT Pro markers for coloring. A light blue color I use for adding some shade into the eyes as well as the cream or other white parts. If you press very lightly, you make a tiny stripe. Now I'm not a pro in coloring, I color by feel. And this part is sped up. It would make the video way too long. You could play this video in slow motion or hit pause if you want to follow it better. Some colors I blend on top of each other. I also add white highlights with a Posca marker. Now I continue coloring on top of the other freak shake. I just color with alcohol markers over some blended parts. I remove the yellow masks on the eye and see that there is a white line around the eye. I will sort of repair the white line that was not blended because I stuck the mask for the eye too high. Using a cotton swab, I blend the small gap. Because now the colors don't match, I also blend in the same color on the other side. Also here I color some parts with the alcohol markers, however not as much as in the other image. For this image I need to cut it out because you will see the blended marks around it. However, if I would have blended it more nicely around it, I even could have left it like is. The other one I can use like this, without cutting. At the moment I like the right one best because of the glossiness of the embossing, but that will change. We will pimp both of the freak shakes to make them even nicer. Because of the coloring with alcohol markers, the glossiness of the embossing powder faded. We get all glossiness back by heating the image again. I see a few spots that can use some more highlights. Adding these with white stripes and dots make an image come to life. You could say the card is finished when you place the image on top like it is now. But let's step it up a bit. First we cut out the figure. Also inside of the handle of the mug. Then we add a line around it. I just use a water-based marker with a broad tip. It helps you to have the figure stand out on the paper and cover up any cutting failures you might have made. Also inside of the handle. Next I want the image to get some shine and shimmer. Therefore I use a Nuvo aqua shimmer water brush. I check if my brush is still clean before I start. If I squeeze the brush you will see what comes out. This is what I apply quickly on the whole figure. It is better to apply this before you add the white highlights. You might wipe them off as they are also water based. This will have to dry. See the shimmer effect? This is what I like a lot. You will have to be careful though on using it, because this is color card paper and black dye ink and white accents. But it works, like you see, if you don't apply too much. Then there are two more things. This is a glazed gel pen by Tsukineko. It's just like a gel pen, but what comes out dries up thick, like it is embossed. I color in the black parts of the eyes and also the black part of the mouth. Do not let this dry up with your heat tool. It will blow and get bulgy like an air balloon. When it all dries, I add the white glimmers of the eyes back in with a white gel pen or a white Posca marker. Here I have 3 different kinds. While this is drying, I will add glossy accents and make more parts glossy. Nowadays the package looks different. A bottle goes a long way. It is from Ranger. If it is a bit older, it gets a little yellow, but when you apply it on top of colored parts, you don't see a thing of it. First squeeze a bit out. We don't want any bubbles. And then we make these yummy donuts glossy. Let's also do it on the glass mug. And again, let this air dry. It dries fairly quickly though, 20 minutes maybe. Vellum. That is what we call parchment paper. It is thin, see-through, milky paper. And this is perfect for adding something extra to a card. I will cut it to 6.5 by 11 centimeters. That will give a border of 2 centimeters on all sides around the vellum. By now my image is dry. I stick it on the vellum with dimensionals. Gluing vellum is a tricky thing. Vellum wrinkles when wet, so gluing with double-sided tape or foam tape is best. And best to use on places where you cannot see through, because the vellum is see-through. That is why I also use the same foam squares on the same spots on the back of the vellum. It gives a floating feeling to it as well. Look how awesome this is! The shiny effects, and you can see a bit see-through. Now it's time for a matching envelope. I put in a piece of thick watercolor paper inside to protect the envelope. And now let's mask off a part that we are going to color. I use the lines of my magnetic craft mat as a guide. For the envelope I will use the same colors as on the card and just mix and match whatever comes in my mind. This line is just in my envelope. I cannot prevent it from showing through, unfortunately. I use a tissue for switching to other colors. I don't have that many blending tools and I will try to keep my fingers clean. Then let's add the stencil on top again and add more color to it. Let us see how it looks when we leave it like this. A gorgeous border, but I want to match it the card and add some stamps as well. So I place the masking paper back again. It is perfect to stamp on spots you don't like the blending that well. And then we can remove the masking tape. Awesome, isn't it? It will dry up a little lighter than it is now. I will add a line with a permanent marker and a T-ruler. Here I show you a similar card I made recently and shared in a short or reel. They are more or less the same, but with little differences. Here I trimmed the panel a bit smaller so you can see a small white border. The other one is glued directly to the card base in the same size. Here I heat embossed the stamping and added the oxide ink and alcohol markers on top. Here I colored with only alcohol markers. I stamped with Memento dye ink and added glossy and shimmer afterwards. I blended in the same colors but skipped the blue on the right card. Here I went more bold and got more ink shades of blending. Watch out to not get mud colors. Here I glued the vellum on both sides with foam squares, where on the other card I also used vellum and doubled up the layer, but I glued it on top of somewhat larger white rectangle. This also makes it more calm. On both envelopes I blended in the same way, added a black line to give the border some more definition. On the right envelope I did not add the stamping. It looks somewhat more calm. It is so nice about handmade cards that you can try things out, add something or skip a thing, make mistakes and learn to get better and enjoy. I hope you liked my cards and learned a lot. Give a thumbs up and leave a comment in the subscriptions. You can find more videos if you click on the top right corner, but watch till the end of this video first. In the subscriptions of the video you can find my affiliate links. Please use them if you are planning to buy any products I used. I shall show you the stencils I used for both cards again. This is the fruit stencil for the right card and this is the eye stencil for the card on the left. I haven't cleaned it yet. Now some bonus tips and the other cards. Here I have a piece of vellum that I want to cut with a deckled edge. Now I only have this square deckled edge die. I have cut this part first and next I cut the other edge again like this. Problem solved. Now we made a small rectangle out of square dies. Here the finished card with the oxide and alcohol markers on the heat embossed image. This piece of vellum I also glued with dimensionals to the card base, as well as the sentiment that I stamped, heat embossed and cut out by hand. On the envelope I ink blended a drip stencil with vintage photo distress oxide ink. I show you quickly how I masked the envelope and shifted the stencil to make the drip longer. The other figures I stamped with the same oxide inks. Using a water brush I color them in, but with almost no water in it. I actually used the ink that was left on the stamps after stamping. Adding a second layer gives dimension and contrast. Also white lines with the Posca marker makes it pop. Next I buff off excess ink, if there is any, so my foam tool stays clean. And then we protect the coloring on the envelope with a thin layer of distress glaze. Also, the color will be a bit more vibrant after using the distressed glaze. Don't apply the distressed glaze in the middle of the envelope. You need some unprotected piece of paper to write on the address. You still can add white highlights on top of the embossing. Here another look at the finished freak shake card. Now I really would like to drink such a shake. As a bonus card, I made this one. It has the same chocolate drip made with embossing powder. This is the one where I used the distress glaze as a second layer. So on top of the clear embossing powder and here the distress glaze. It is mostly covered by the vellum in the middle, but you can still see this drip. The text is white embossed on the vellum. I made the cute glasses that Carla showed in her video. In the video descriptions you will find a link to it. I made you a short video where you can see how I made this card. I stamped the images of the card on watercolor paper and colored with distress inks. Be careful with coloring on the envelope. This is just regular paper. Coloring on watercolor card paper is much more beautiful and easier to do as well. The glasses are masked on the envelope by stamping, while the glasses on the card are raised with foam blocks. There will be a short reel video about this card on Tuesday. Aren't the popsicles cutie? So here are the 3 cards together and they are so nice. You can see the shimmer and the glimmer. They look so happy and tasty and make me so happy. I hope I inspired you in using these stamps and gave you ideas for your own card making. In this video I showed you how to use distress oxide ink, VersaFine ink and Memento ink. I quickly colored with alcohol markers and distress inks and also shared cutting, die cutting and layering tips. And in this video I gave you tips about heat embossing and the different papers you can use. Knowing how to use the products in combination with different papers give better results. And now I told you all the tricks to pimp up a colored image with some glimmer, I am very curious what you will come up with next. In the top right corner you can find a playlist to all my carlacreaties videos, so you can binge watch them. And here below you can tap more to see all information and product links and add a comment under the video. Please do so. Add a thumbs up and thank you. Bye bye. See you next time.